I want you to picture uh, a standard piano keyboard.
Okay.
You know, you've got the white keys, you've got the black keys,
Yeah.
12 notes in an octave.
Right. The absolute foundation of everything we learn.
Exactly. And it looks like the entire universe of Western music is just, neatly laid out in black and white right there in front of you.
Yeah, it really does.
But what if the real magic of music, like the most profound, tense, and beautiful sounds, aren't actually sitting on those keys at all?
Well, spoiler alert, they aren't.
Right. What if they are hidden in the invisible, tiny cracks right between them? Because to understand the absolute cutting edge of jazz today, we have to realize that the 12 keys on that piano are actually a lie.
A pretty massive lie, actually.
Just a mathematical compromise that we made centuries ago.
It is a huge compromise. And unpacking that lie is exactly what we are doing today. We are looking at this really fascinating column from Monumental Movement Records, all about what they call microtonal or quarter tone jazz. And the core mission of this deep dive today is to explore how jazz musicians have evolved from, simply bending notes organically.
Like in the blues?
Exactly, like in the blues. Evolving from that into creating these incredibly rigorous mathematical frameworks for music that just completely ignore the standard 12-note grid.
Which is wild to think about. I feel like a good way for you listening to visualize this 12-note grid is to compare it to digital pixels versus analog film.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so if you take a digital photo and zoom in far enough, eventually you hit this rigid block of color.
Right.
A pixel.
Right, it can't be broken down any further than that.
Exactly. That is our 12-tone piano system. But microtonal jazz is like analog film. There are no blocks, just this smooth, infinite gradient of color.
That's a really perfect way to frame it.
But I guess before we get to the modern jazz pioneers who are navigating that infinite gradient, we kind of have to understand why we built the pixels in the first place.
Right, why do we box ourselves in?
Yeah. How do we end up with exactly 12 keys?
Well, to understand that, we actually have to look at the physics of sound. Specifically, the overtone series.
Okay, lay it on me.
So whenever you pluck a string or blow into a horn to play a single note, let's say, I don't know, a low C, you aren't just hearing that one frequency.
Wait, really? It sounds like just one note to me.
I know, our brains process it as one note, but physically, the string vibrates as a whole, but it also simultaneously vibrates in halves, and in thirds, and in quarters, and so on.
So the smaller fractions of the string are actually producing their own higher pitches, even if we barely notice them.
Exactly. They ring out as these fainter, higher pitches stacked right on top of the fundamental note. First it's an octave, then a perfect fifth, then a major third, and they get closer and closer together as they go up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that naturally occurring stack of frequencies is the overtone series. It is pure natural physics. And for centuries, tuning systems like Pythagorean tuning or what's called just intonation, they tried to build their scales by mathematically locking into those pure natural ratios.
Okay, but if the math is pure and comes straight from nature, what's the problem?
The problem is that nature's math doesn't neatly loop back onto itself.
What do you mean?
Well, if you start stacking those perfectly pure intervals on top of each other and try to traverse across different musical keys, the math falls out of alignment. You end up with what acousticians call a comma.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, in music, a comma isn't a pause or a breath, right? It's an actual minute discrepancy in pitch.
Precisely, like the Pythagorean comma.
Right.
It's a physical discrepancy. Because of this comma, mathematically, a C sharp and a D flat are naturally slightly different pitches.
Which would mean you'd need like extra keys on a piano just to play them both perfectly.
Exactly. And as Western music evolved into the 18th and 19th centuries, composers wanted to write this highly complex music that rapidly shifted or modulated through lots of different keys.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, dealing with those minute pitch discrepancies made tuning a piano or a massive orchestra an absolute logistical nightmare.
So to fix the nightmare, we just forced the math to loop. We made it fit.
We did. We created 12-tone equal temperament. We took the octave, basically threw away the pure overtone math, and just sliced the octave into 12 perfectly equal artificial steps.
Wow.
We just decided, hey, C sharp and D flat are just going to share the exact same key on the piano. Close enough.
Wait, if we threw away the pure overtone math, does that mean every piano I've ever heard is technically out of tune with natural physics?
Yes, every single one.
That is insane.
In equal temperament, a major third is tuned about 14 cents, which is just a measurement of pitch distance. It's 14 cents too sharp compared to pure acoustic reality.
So it makes writing music down and building instruments incredibly convenient. But we traded acoustic perfection for that convenience.
We absolutely did. We chose the grid over the gradient.
Which brings us perfectly to the blues. Because while classical European music was, rigidly adhering to this compromised 12-tone grid, early blues and jazz musicians in the 20th century were just completely ignoring it.
Completely.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the defining characteristic of the blues, the blue note.
Right.
Usually that refers to the third, fifth, or seventh degree of a scale. And if you read a standard Western music theory textbook, it will tell you a blue note is a minor or diminished interval which places it firmly on one specific piano key.
Right. But if you sit down and actually listen to a solo by B.B. King or Miles Davis, you realize they aren't playing the minor key and they aren't playing the major key. They're hanging out in the crack between them.
Yes, exactly. In the jazz tradition, pitch has historically been treated as a zone, an area rather than a fixed point.
A zone, I like that.
Yeah, a saxophone player might start a note slightly flat, let it linger in that microtonal space, and slowly bend it up into the center of the pitch. They are actively exploring the tension in that gradient.
But here is where I get tripped up by the sources today. If jazz musicians were already bending pitches naturally and organically by ear, and it sounded so deeply emotional, why did anyone feel the need to build a rigid, formalized system out of it?
That's a great question.
Like, why take something so soulful and try to turn it into complex math?
Well, the shift here is about moving from organically breaking the rules to structurally expanding the architecture of the music itself.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Bending a note by ear is a temporary deviation for emotional effect, right? But the pioneers of microtonal jazz asked a different question. What if that bent note is treated as its own independent structural pillar?
Oh, I see.
You can't build a massive, complex skyscraper by just feeling it out by ear. At some point, you need new blueprints.
And those blueprints took the form of 24 tet, right?
Yes, 24 equal temperament. Instead of 12 steps in an octave, they divided it into 24.
So they just doubled it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They took the half step, which is the smallest distance on a standard piano, and sliced it perfectly in half again. Suddenly, a note that is a quarter tone sharp isn't a mistake or a temporary bend anymore.
It's an actual destination.
Right, a permanent destination in their new musical alphabet.
Let me stop you there, though, because a piano has fixed strings, and a saxophone has fixed keys built specifically for the 12-tone system. How does a saxophone player even physically play 24 distinct notes?
That is where we get to Joe Maneri. He was a massive pioneer of this in the 1980s and 90s.
Okay.
He was a saxophonist and clarinetist who fundamentally changed how we navigate pitch. To play those in-between notes, he used incredibly complex alternate fingerings.
Meaning he's pressing down combinations of keys that you usually aren't supposed to press together.
Exactly. And he combined that with microscopic adjustments to his embouchure, which is how his mouth and lips bite down on the reed.
So he's physically wrestling the instrument to produce frequencies it was never manufactured to make.
He really is. And in doing so, Maneri argued that we should stop thinking of pitch as a fixed function and start treating it purely as a distance.
Just a distance.
Yeah, when he played, he didn't just jump from a C to a D. He figured out how to play phrases as a smooth, continuous curve.
It's like if you picture an architect going into a building and replacing all the staircases with perfectly smooth ramps.
Yes, that is exactly what it sounds like.
I want you listening to really imagine being in the audience for a Joe Maneri solo. Because when you listen to standard music, your brain is subconsciously anticipating the next note.
Constantly.
It's desperately waiting for the musician to land on a standard, familiar piano key so you can find your footing. And when someone like Maneri intentionally hovers exactly a quarter tone above that familiar note, it creates this physical, suspenseful itch in your brain that you just can't scratch.
And that physical itch is exactly the point. Maneri used the density of these micro pitches to build incredible psychological tension.
It sounds exhausting, but in a good way.
It is. When you are sliding through frequencies that the Western ear just isn't trained to hear as stable, it completely warps your perception of time in the music.
The Monumental Movement Records column mentions he was a huge educational force in Boston, teaching this to a whole generation of players.
He was, yeah.
But how do you teach someone to hear a quarter tone if they've been conditioned their whole life to only hear 12 notes?
Well, his teaching relied on extreme ear training. You couldn't just hand a student a piece of sheet music with 24 notes and expect them to play it.
Right. The paper wouldn't even make sense.
No. So he forced his students to understand a relative pitch through shared resonance. He might have one student play a continuous drone note and another student slowly, painstakingly slide their pitch up.
Just grind against that drone note.
Exactly, forcing them to actively listen to how the acoustic interference patterns, like the actual physical vibrations in the room, changed as the frequencies rubbed against each other.
But wait, doesn't that inherently sound incredibly dissonant? I mean, if a whole band is living in the cracks, constantly rubbing frequencies against each other, how do they avoid it sounding like a middle school band room on the first day of class?
That is the crucial pivot in modern microtonal jazz. Because you're right, Joe Maneri used microtones primarily to create melodic tension and friction. It was meant to feel unsettling. But as we move into the 2010s, we see the rise of musicians like Jacob Collier. And for Collier, microtones are what he calls a harmonic necessity.
Harmonic necessity.
Yeah, he uses them to do the exact opposite of chaos. He uses them to create mathematically flawless harmony.
Wait, how does playing pitches that don't exist on a piano result in flawless harmony? That feels backward.
Well, remember that compromise we talked about earlier, how equal temperament forces a major third to be 14 cents too sharp compared to the natural overtone series.
Right, the 12-tone system is fundamentally out of tune with nature.
Right. And because of that sharpness, whenever you play a chord on a piano, the sound waves clash just a tiny bit. It creates this acoustic phenomenon called beats.
Okay, let me see if I can clarify beats for you, listening with an analogy.
Go for it.
Imagine you were stopped at a red light, and the car in front of you has its turn signal on,
Okay.
and your turn signal is also on.
Yeah.
For a few seconds, they blink in perfect sync, right? Click, click, click.
Best feeling in the world.
It is. But because the electrical timing is just fractions of a millisecond different between the two cars, they slowly drift out of sync.
Right.
It creates this chaotic, staggered rhythm until eventually they drift all the way back into sync again. When a piano plays a chord, the sound waves are doing that exact same drifting dance. They are wobbling.
That is a brilliant analogy, and most of us are so conditioned to that 12-tone turn signal wobble that our brains just filter it out. We don't even hear the beats anymore.
But Jacob Collier does.
Oh, Jacob Collier hears the wobble, and he wants to stop the drift entirely.
Wow.
So he demands his musicians use microtones to physically alter their pitch to match pure, natural, just intonation.
Meaning he fixes the math in real time.
Exactly. If the major third is 14 cents sharp in the 12-tone system, Collier will have his singer physically flatten their note by exactly 14 cents to hit a pure 5-to-4 frequency ratio.
And that actually stops the beating. The wobble just goes away.
Completely. The frequencies align perfectly.
Yeah.
And when he does this, chords that contain insane amounts of density and dissonance suddenly ring out with this pure, glassy clarity. The room literally vibrates differently.
Okay, but wait. If he's flattening notes by 14 cents just to make the current chord ring perfectly, doesn't that mean he's now out of tune with the rest of the song? How does he ever get back to the home key?
Well, here's the secret. He doesn't always go back.
Really?
Yeah, he uses something called microtonal modulation. Because he is following the pure math of the chords rather than a fixed grid, the entire tonal center of the song might drift.
So the ground is literally moving underneath the band.
Yes. An ensemble could start a piece perfectly in tune in the key of C, navigate through a series of these pure acoustic chords, and by the end of the song, the math dictates that the new C is actually a quarter tone flatter than when they started.
And no one notices.
It sounds completely natural to the audience because every step along the way was mathematically perfect.
Okay, that completely blows my mind, but it also brings up a massive logistical nightmare for me.
What's that?
If Collier is demanding his alto sing a pitch that doesn't even exist on a piano just to perfectly align with the bass co, how on earth does a human singer find that invisible note in the middle of a live performance without just staring at a digital tuner the whole time?
It requires a massive paradigm shift in how musicians communicate in real time. If we look at improvisation first, players don't just run up and down a Dorian scale anymore.
Right, because the scale has 24 or more notes now.
Exactly. So phrase building in microtonal space becomes highly geometric.
Geometric, what does that actually mean in the context of an improvised solo?
It means improvisers are plotting a trajectory. They focus on the specific angle of ascent or descent and the deliberate expanding or contracting of the intervals between notes.
So it's less about hitting a specific target note and more about the shape of the journey.
You nailed it. And rhythm is the vehicle they use to showcase it. If a trumpet player wants to highlight the excruciating tension of a pitch that is just 3 cents away from a resolution, they will sustain that note for a massive, drawn-out measure.
Just making the audience sit in that tension.
Right, but if they want to overwhelm the listener with density, they will execute these blistering, clustered runs that hit a dozen micropitches in a single second.
But how do you write any of this down? I mean, sheet music has 5 lines and 4 spaces, and it was literally built for the 12-tone system. How do you play a note that is 1/4 of the way between C and C sharp, but approach it at a 45-degree angle?
The short answer is you barely can.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I mean, composers have invented extended accidentals. You'll see new symbols like backward flacs or half sharps to denote quarter tones, but the Monumental Movement Records column points out that notation is still severely limited. This music survives heavily on oral tradition and extreme active listening.
It gets right back to that shared resonance Maneri was teaching in the 90s.
Exactly. When a modern microtonal ensemble rehearses, they aren't tuning to an absolute pitch like A equals 440 on an electronic tuner. They are tuning relative to each other.
So it's a living, breathing ecosystem.
Yes. The bass player establishes the fundamental frequency, and the horn players and vocalists use their ears to physically locate the overtones ringing in the room. They're literally locking their micro adjustments into those invisible slots.
It sounds like a deeply communal, just hyper-aware state of playing.
It absolutely is.
Which is a beautiful concept, it really is, but it feels so incredibly subjective.
How so?
Well, if everything relies on human feeling and the specific acoustic resonance of a room on a random Tuesday night, how do we know it's actually happening?
I see what you mean.
Which leads me to one of my absolute favorite parts of this research today. Because we don't have to just take their word for it anymore, we can actually prove it with science.
We can. Acoustic analysis technology has finally caught up to what these jazz musicians have been doing by ear for decades. Researchers are now using spectrograms and Fourier analysis to visually capture these microtonal performances.
And just for you listening, a spectrogram is essentially a visual heat map of sound. You can see the frequency and intensity of every single vibration over time.
Right.
And Fourier analysis is the math behind it. I like to think of Fourier analysis like taking a blended fruit smoothie.
Okay, smoothie.
Yeah, and using a mathematical formula to separate it back out into the exact amounts of strawberries, bananas, and kale that went into it.
That's a brilliant way to explain it.
Thanks. In audio, it takes a complex, chaotic saxophone screech and perfectly separates it into individual frequency lines on a computer screen.
And when you run a microtonal jazz solo through that process, the results are just staggering.
What do you see?
Well, you don't just see the standard notes. You can literally trace the micro peaks in frequency. You can watch the overtone structure shift in real time as a saxophonist minutely alters their embouchure.
So you can actually measure the wobble we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Researchers can measure the exact unsent deviations, literally quantifying the physical tension that Joe Maneri was inducing in his audience. We can look at a computer screen and see the math of human emotion.
But doesn't that present a fascinating contradiction?
What do you mean?
Well, if we need a high-tech Fourier analysis to mathematically prove what is happening, and we can't even accurately write it down on traditional sheet music for someone else to play, is microtonal jazz actually a system, or is it just a highly elevated communal musical feeling?
That tension is really the defining characteristic of the whole genre, because the answer is it is absolutely both.
Both.
Yes. It is a rigorous mathematical system grounded in the undeniable physics of the overtone series, but it's a system that can only be executed through profound human intuition, deep listening, and real-time physical adjustment.
Because if a machine does it, it misses the point.
Exactly. If a computer plays 24-tet perfectly, it just sounds sterile. But when a human improviser navigates it, fighting the limitations of their instrument to find that perfect hidden resonance, that is when it becomes jazz. They are taking the absolute limits of acoustic theory and handing it over to the human spirit.
Man, that is powerful. So, synthesizing everything we've pulled from this MMR column today, what is the real takeaway here for us?
I think the biggest takeaway is that microtonal jazz is not a gimmick.
Right, it's not just some party trick.
No, it's not just slapping 12 extra keys onto a piano to be avant-garde and weird.
Yeah.
It is a fundamental re-recognition of reality. It's the realization that sound is a continuous fluid spectrum, not a rigid grid. Joe Maneri explored that spectrum physically through the density and tension of those melodic curves.
And Jacob Collier explores it harmonically.
Right, using micro adjustments to unlock the pristine natural math of the universe. But both of them prove that the 12-tone system we just blindly accept as the absolute truth of music, it's really just one tiny manufactured neighborhood in a massive acoustic universe.
It's just the pixels, not the whole picture.
Exactly.
So the next time you listen to your favorite music, whether it's a jazz record, a pop song, or even a symphony, I want you to try something. Try to listen past the main melody.
Yeah, dig a little deeper.
Listen past the obvious notes that land exactly where you expect them to. Try to imagine that infinite, invisible gradient of acoustic space hiding in the cracks between the keys. If you put yourself in the shoes of these musicians and actively listen for the wobble, for the tension, for that overtone resonance, you will honestly never hear music the same way again.
Once you realize the grid is an illusion, the entire spectrum really does open up to you.
It really does. And I think it leaves me with one final thought for you to chew on after we wrap up today.
Oh, I love these. Let's hear it.
Well, we learned today that the standard 12-note piano system was just a compromise, right? It was a way for humanity to take a beautiful, wild, continuous reality and chop it up into neat little digital boxes.
Just to make it easier to deal with.
Exactly, to make it easier to write down, easier to teach, and easier to control. And it just makes you wonder, what other beautiful, complex continuums in our daily lives have we chopped up into rigid little boxes just because the raw, infinite truth was too hard to digest? Are we missing the microtones of our own lives?